Let's go back into the code because we still have to add those components. So we go back to the header file, the character, and I'm going to put the components under protected. We don't need direct access on from the outside of this class, just like regular C++. And the components that we want are camera components. And as you can see, these actually have a U as a prefix because they derive from UObject and not from actor. So that's why they still have that U prefix. And I'm just going to call this camera comp. And the other one that we want is because we want to make a third-person character. So we already luckily have another component available for us, which gives us some functionality of having like a camera boom, just like you would in film. And it is called a spring arm component. And it is, and I'll show you in a second how that works and what that looks like in the editor. For now, we're just going to make it like so. And then we're going to have to forward declare this because currently the compiler would not know what this is. And we don't want to include the classes here because that will be bad for our compilation time. So the minimum that we can do is just forward declare camera components. And the other one is use spring arm components. Now the compiler will at least know that we're dealing with a class. It doesn't know anything else about it, but this is all that it needs to know at this point. And then we jump over to the CPP file because we do need to instantiate it. We haven't actually created an instance of these components yet. So they're just empty pointers at this point. So let's go and create those. And we have a special function for that available in the constructor specifically. You can't use this function outside of it, and it's called create default sub object. It expects, using the Angular brackets, expects a type. So it's a templated function, in case you're familiar with that from prior CS classes. The only thing we need to do here is just specify the type. So the spring arm component, that's the type of object that we want to instantiate here. So function create default subobject, spring arm component is the type, and that will create an instance for us. And the only thing we need to do here is give it a name. And this name will be how it shows up in the editor. It's for nothing else than just a good name that is easy to identify it in the editor. So we, again, just use it, call it spring arm component. That's all. And we'll do the same for the camera. So I'll create a new create default subobject. And it's you camera component, and we'll give it another name. In this case, it's just going to be called camera comp. This will be enough for at least the basics. It's not going to be completely done, but I'll show you what happens in this case. So we'll save that, and I think I still have the editor open. Yeah, so I'm just going to close it. I don't want to hot reload that. So we'll just recompile that and launch the editor again. Oh, actually, I probably forgot the includes. Yeah, I actually forgot to do the includes. Of course, because we're using the spring arm component and the camera component, so we need to, of course, include those. And in the case of Visual Studio, the Visual Assist just has a right-click option just to add the include automatically for us. If you don't have that, what I usually end up doing is if you hold down Control, I think this also works in vanilla Visual Studio, you can look up the class wherever it's located. What I end up doing is just to see where the file is actually located. In this case, it is camera/camera component. It is always only one folder deep. It's never any more in the case of Unreal. So here we can manually add camera/camera components. So, and now we can actually compile, and now it should properly work. And there's still two things missing here to properly set up these components, but I just want to show you what that looks like. So let's open up the test level. And what you can see is if we select this character, you can see that the camera is actually in the floor. It didn't properly link itself to the character. We did instantiate it, but actually it's not attached to anything. So we can see here that even if we move the character, it still remains on world 0. So if we play, actually we don't even see the floor because we're in the floor. So that's a little bit broken. The other thing that we didn't do properly yet is if we go up and open up the player character blueprint, if it opens like this, this is actually the data only view. I never use this because it's always kind of annoying. It's really hard to read what's going on. It's just a whole bunch of data. I always open up the full blueprint editor. That's much more useful because that shows this view, which is much more easy to read. And it might open like this if you don't have any blueprint nodes set up. let's click on the spring arm component. This whole details panel is empty. And by comparison, if we click on the mesh, here we have all these variables available to us that we can configure. But here in the spring arm and the camera component, it's not available, and that's because we didn't expose it. I'll try to explain like more deeply how to expose these components so that they properly show up with the details panel, and then we can actually tweak them in Blueprint, because that's really powerful to just quickly make some changes in your Blueprint and just play immediately, like instantly. You don't have to recompile your C++ or restart the editor. And the other thing, of course, we have to do is make sure that the camera is properly attached to our character. Because what you can see now as well here is we want to make sure that this camera attaches itself to this spring arm, because we want this spring arm to be used to rotate the camera from a distance, rather than having this what would look like a first-person view. We want to turn it into a third-person view, and I'll show you in a second how we can do that and what that actually means and looks like. So I'm just going to exit. We don't need to save that. First thing first is I want to make sure that everything is attached properly. So again, in the constructor, what I want to do is I want to make sure that the spring arm is properly attached to the character. And we can literally do that by calling setup attachments on the spring arm. And we want to attach it to just the root of our character. We don't have any special hierarchy. And so we can just attach it to the root component. And the root component is whatever is the first component in the hierarchy of the components. And that is, in this case of the character, that is the capsule that we saw. I could show you in a second again, once we're back in the editor, which component that was exactly, and I'll show you kind of the hierarchy that we're building here, because you need to visualize that for that to really make sense. And then for the camera components, I also want to set up attachments, but this one I want to attach to the spring arm components, because that's the whole point of having the spring arm component, is that we have a distance between our character and the camera. And one of the nice things about the spring arm component actually is that it has some collision checking for us built in, so that the camera never sticks through the wall. And I'll show you in just a second what that actually looks like. So if we block the path between the character and the camera, then the arm will become less and the camera will adjust. And I'll show you in a sec for that to make more sense. But before we go back in the editor, I want to make sure that we expose this. And this is a first look at the Unreal property system, as they call it. The Unreal ships with an Unreal property system, and it basically is all those macros, all the all caps macros that start with U. So U property, U function, U class, U struct, U enum. And they are purely there to mark up your C++ for things like editor and blueprints access. Even for networking behavior. So once we reach that in around week 6 or 7, we'll get back, and then we can use this markup to specify where your code should be running. Should it be running on a server or on the local client machine? And we'll explain what all that means once we hit that point. And it's also for memory management. Unreal uses it for tracking of pointers and object memory, and it handles a lot of boilerplate code for us. And I have a bunch of links that are going to be useful to read up on if you want to know a little bit more about it. The bottom 2 links are actually all the specifiers that we can pass in, and I'll show you in a second what one of those specifiers looks like. So let's just go back and actually expose these components. And we do that by adding U property. What I want to do is I just want to use visible anywhere. This, as the name implies, now it will be visible anywhere. Anywhere in the editor, we can see this property and we can see its variables. That's all we really need to do. We could specify a getter category, but I just want to keep it as small as possible for now. So then if we compile this again, we should be able to see 2 things have improved now. First of all, we should now be able to see all the variables, and we should be able to have the camera properly attached to the character. So let's open up the level again, the same test level. And we can already see one thing is drastically improved, and that is that the camera is properly attached and is now behind our character. And if we open up the character blueprint, and I'll open up the same full blueprint again. Now, if you click it, we have all of its properties available. And the same for the camera component, we have all of its properties available. This is because we now properly exposed it. And another thing you might notice is that the camera component is now indented and attached to the spring arm component. And the spring arm component is attached to the capsule component. So now that's properly set up, and that's what the setup attachment function is for. Now what we could do actually, and let me actually show you how that spring arm component works, because you might be wondering what the function is of this red little line. So if we drop in a cube just from the deal spanner here, as I move it in and out of the way, you can see that the camera is adjusting to make sure that it doesn't go through the wall. And that's kind of like the whole point. Otherwise, we might have a wall between our character and our camera, and we won't even be able to see the character. So that's kind of what that does. It just checks for collision.